The Return of the Indian, The Troops, Chapter 12. The boys ate lunch decorously downstairs so as not to arouse suspicion, although it was sheer agony to leave the attic bedroom when so much was going on. Little Bear was absolutely in torment, they could see, and though Omri for his part was in no hurry to send him back, he felt they must do something as soon as possible to further the plan. What do you think about that idea of getting Indians and sending them back with now guns back to the 1700s to try to help Little Bear? Good idea? Bad idea? Omri's parents were full of the party they were going to that evening, and Adiel and Gillen were going on to the movies, and they were arguing fiercely about which one. Gillen was carrying on a side argument with his parents about the desirability of hiring a video, which he assured them would save far more than it cost in the end. Parental reaction to this excellent idea was, as usual, automatic and negative. All this could not help seeming ridiculously trivial to Omri, who had so much on his mind. They'd been out into the model shop before lunch, and Omri had taken along one of his books on Indians and tried to find the ones who were dressed in the distinctive Iroquois clothes. Floppy leggings with feather decorations, moccasins gathered around the ankles, a sort of sporran thing hanging like an apron from the waist, turkey feathers in a band around the forehead, only there weren't many like that. It was extraordinary what a variety of Indian costumes there were, and the model shop had what appeared to be representatives from a dozen tribes. Omri knew how bitter the hatred between warring tribes could be. The Algonquins, for instance, were the Iroquois' mortal enemies. It would be no use bringing any of them. But since there weren't anything like enough that he was sure were Iroquois, Omri had bought some others he wasn't sure of in the hope that Little Bear would recognize them as belonging to some friendly Indian nation who would agree to help the Iroquois in their hour of trial. Patrick, book in hand, was at another shelf looking through English soldiers of differing periods. He wanted to find some who might have fought the French in America. Omri wasn't keen on bringing any white men into it, and Patrick said they were in it already. I bet they'd handle modern weapons better than a bunch of primitive Indians anyway. Omri told him not to be so racist, but when Patrick found some that looked right, according to an illustration in a book, Omri made no objection to buying even one mounted officer. The horse, a handsome black, made him much more expensive. The whole lot, about 50 assorted Indians and 5 soldiers, set them back over $10, which for Omri was 2 weeks' allowance or pocket money. Patrick chipped in, although he hadn't brought much. So now they had this bag full of potential allies for Little Bear, and the boys couldn't wait to get started. As soon as lunch was over, the rest of the family scattered, and the house became quiet. And on the way upstairs, Omri said, "Do you think we dare bring them outdoors?" "I want to start putting things in the cupboard," said Patrick. "So do I. I mean, bring the cupboard out too, and then if any shooting should start, it won't be so dangerous." "Why should it be any less dangerous outdoors?" "I don't know. It just feels like it would be." "Well, okay. But what if your father or anyone comes out in the garden?" "Dad's painting in his studio, and anyway, there's a hedged-off bit down at the bottom, which is just shrubs. He never goes there." They found the little people waiting for them anxiously. "Where Omri go so long time?" Little Bear demanded at once. "Calm down. We've been getting the men." Little Bear sat up straight, his eyes glowing. "Show! In a minute." Carefully, Omri lifted the matchbox bed onto the seed tray. "Bright stars, cover him up warmly. We're going outside." She put the gloved finger around him into the armpits while Boone ran up the ramp and pulled it up behind him. The 2 ponies were munching grass in their fenced-off paddock. Omri picked the whole thing up while Patrick took the cupboard and the bag of new men. As an afterthought, he slipped Matron into his pocket. Omri did a quick reconnaissance to see that nobody was around, and then they cautiously trooped down the stairs and out the kitchen door onto the back garden. It was really a lovely place, far better than their old garden. It was not just a rectangle of lawn with a few flower beds. It had nooks and crannies. Omri headed for his favorite corner, a clump of bushes with a patch of grass in the middle, where rhododendrons and other tall plants kept prying eyes at bay. The sun was high, and the place was sheltered from the wind. Still, Omri suggested Little Bear should be put into the longhouse to keep warm. "No, not want. Want be in sun. Sun give a renda." "What's that?" Little Bear looked baffled. "Not know a renda? A renda for all men, life strength, sun give and rain, a renda in animal, plant, all thing. Master of good make. Now Omri be master of good. Make brave, many, fight for Little Bear people." Omri felt a cold shiver. He didn't like the idea of playing God, but it was too late to back out now. They laid the seed tray and the cupboard on the grass. Boone at once put the ramp back in position, saddled his pony, tested his lasso, which he kept coiled around the pommel, and set off for a ride. It was rough going, as the grass in the shrubbery was not often mowed, but he didn't seem to mind. "You fellas settle things. I'm going for a gallop." "Keep us in sight," said Patrick. That's same as saying keep the Rocky Mountain in sight, laughed Boone. He waved his hat at them and went racing off between the grass stems, shouting yippee in the approved cowboy fashion. One of the most satisfying things about Boone was the fact that he always behaved exactly as the boys expected. This helped to balance Little Bear. They never knew what to expect from him. The boys now began to set out the little men they'd bought in lines for Little Bear to inspect. Even though the Indians were well aware they couldn't see him, he seemed to be ashamed before them lying in what he called a white man bed. He made Bright Stars help him off of it, and onto a stack of rhododendron leaves he ordered to be laid on the earth. It looked very grand, like stiff layers of shiny green leather, but not very comfortable, Omri thought. Little Bear sat cross-legged and stared narrowly at the Indian figures one by one. Several times he demanded that one of them be brought and laid before him for closer inspection. So remember, these are all plastic right now, and he's just looking at them. Some he discarded with an imperious wave of his hand, and once he uttered a deep growl. Why bring Algonquin enemy? Sorry, said Omri, hastily removing the offending figure. I thought he was a Mohawk. He dressed like one. Mohawk part of Iroquois nation. Omri not see difference? Stupid. Big eyes not best. About 3/4 of the men they brought were eventually approved, and then Little Bear turned his eyes to the British soldiers. They were rather splendid in their white breeches, scarlet coats, and three-cornered hats, but Omri didn't think they looked very businesslike. The white bands crossed their chests and backs and made ideal targets, but perhaps the brilliance of their uniforms were intended to intimidate the enemy. Anyway, they were all armed with muskets tipped with fearsome-looking blades. Omri bent one easily with his fingers, thinking how sharp and lethal they would be when the cupboard had done its work and these bayonet swords became gleaming steel. These no good, Little Bear pronounced abruptly. Patrick and Omri were astonished. What's wrong with them, said Patrick. Are they from the wrong time? Right time, near right. English soldier like that fight French in big battles soon before. French win. Oh, why? Fight better? But also, English dress stupid. This. He pointed contemptuously to the red coats and white trimmings. Now think about this. The soldiers back then, the English soldiers wore red coats with white ribbing going like this, and it makes like a bullseye. Why, as a soldier, would you want to dress where everyone can notice you, right? What's the way we should dress if you're a soldier, probably? With camouflage? Catch, son. Call I a French soldier. Gun, point, shoo! He made a shooting noise. No good if soldier proud. Must dress so enemy not see. Well, how do the English soldiers dress now? More like Indian. Earth colors like leaf, shadow. More good for hide. Jump out on enemy. White man learn much from Indian. Now who's proud? Patrick whispered to Omri. Little Bear, hear that, the Indian roared. Really, he had ears like a bat. Well, anyway, so you don't want us to bring these men to life, said Patrick hurriedly. Not need. Enough with braves and now guns. The boys exchanged glances. This was tricky. Little Bear was proud, and he wouldn't like the suggestion that the white men might be better with modern weapons. Listen, Little Bear, Omri began coaxingly. Suddenly they froze. Omri heard his mother's voice calling him from the house. Omri! What? He called back, getting quickly to his feet. Darling, Kitsa's caught a bird or a mouse or something. Anyway, she's playing with it on the big lawn. Can you... Omri's mind seemed to blow hollow like an egg. He stopped hearing what his mother was saying, but Patrick was up and off like a flash, charging through the bushes like a madman. Omri came behind him and the branches smacking him across the face. And on the main lawn was Kitsa, her blackness and whiteness beautiful, sleek and deadly in the sunshine. And she was crouched and concentrated, her tail tip just twitching, all else above her perfectly still. And there was something small and helpless and alive in the grass in front of her. There's Kitsa. Who do you see in front of her? Who's she after? Can you see Boone? Can you see Boone over here on the horse? That's not good. Remember, he went off for a ride, and Kitsa has seen him. Kitsa! Omri screamed out her name, startled, and she turned her head, and both boys were pelting toward her, and furious at the interruption, she turned back, and with one quick wiggle of her hips, she pounced. At almost the same second, Patrick reached her. Without time to think, he kicked her, or rather kicked at her, and she started to jump away at the same second, so that his foot, although it did just about connect with her, merely accelerated her flight through the air. With a yowl of outrage, empty-mouthed and thwarted, she fled. Omri and Patrick fell to their knees on the spot where Kitsa had so hastily vacated. The white horse was lying on its side. Its legs were moving, but it was obviously hurt. It kept raising its head and whinnying, and then letting its head drop back again. Boone was lying half under it, and he didn't move. Patrick very gently shifted the pony until he could lift Boone clear. And suddenly Boone shot to his feet and shouted, "Am I dead? Did it kill me?" "You look okay to me," said Patrick. His voice sounded to Omri like the voice of a complete stranger. It was deep and gruff like a man's. Boone was looking around in a daze. What was it?" "A cat." "A cat? That was the biggest dang critter I ever seen in my entire life. It just came from nowhere. One minute I was riding along, minding my own business, and suddenly—" And then his eyes fell on his horse. It raised its head again and whickered softly as if asking him to help it. And there was a terrible moment of silence, and Boone crouched by the horse's head, stroking it, running his hands over it. He unbuckled the saddle and lifted it clear and very gently ran his hands over its white side. And then he took off his hat. It was a strange gesture. Omri had seen men do it in films when they heard of someone's death, a gesture of respect, of something stronger than respect, and Boone stood up. "His ribs is broke," he said. "I'm going to have to finish him." So if a horse breaks its ribs, they can't heal. Isn't that sad? "Oh, no," Omri heard himself say in a desperate voice. Ain't no use in keeping him alive to suffer. He's my pal." His voice, which cracked and dissolved into tears at the least thing, was now perfectly steady. Slowly he reached for his revolver. Omri couldn't bear it. "Please, Boone, don't. Surely we could save him." Boone shook his head. "He's too far gone. I gotta do it." He looked up again and his face was strained but dry-eyed. "You boys turn your backs. This ain't for kids to see." Omri turned his back and Patrick didn't, and Boone bent down. He whispered something briefly into the horse's ear, and then he put his revolver to its head. Omri didn't see this, but he heard the shot, and tears spurted from his eyes, and he couldn't check them. He wiped them hard and furiously with both hands. Why should he, who hardly ever cried anymore, cry over the death of Boone's horse, when Boone, who cried all the time, was so controlled? Turning around, seeing Boone standing quietly beside the horse's body with his hat in one hand and a smoking revolver in the other, Omri tried to feel ashamed of his own weakness, but he couldn't. It was his fault partly that this disaster had happened. They'd been so preoccupied with the plan and the exciting prospect of bringing more little people to life that they had let Boone ride off into a monstrous wilderness, full of deadly dangers. That it should have been Omri's own beloved little cat who had done this made everything worse. Irrational fury seized him. He crouched down. "I'll kill her," he ground out between his teeth. Boone looked up at him. "Don't you kill nothing, kid. That critter was only following its instincts. You can't blame a cat for being a cat, even if he do fall on a fella as fierce and sudden as a Texas hurricane. We'll get you another horse." "Yeah, you do that, and I'll get to be pals with it same as I was with this one. Someday, I guess. A man ain't whole without a horse." He replaced his gun in its holster. "Just now, could I have a shovel?" Patrick swallowed, cleared his throat, and said, "We'll bury him for you, Boone." "Thanks, son. I'd be obliged to you." Omri fetched a trowel from the greenhouse and dug a small hole in the flower bed just under a nodding chrysanthemum. Boone took the bridle off the horse and laid the saddle over his arm. Then Patrick picked up the body. It was still warm and strangely heavy for its size. He laid it in the hole, and Omri covered it up and made a little mound. They stood for a moment, and then Boone settled his hat back on his ginger head. "Come on back, then," he said. "We'll best get getting back to the others before something happens to them." Patrick carried the cowboy back through the rhododendrons. There was no sign of Little Bear and Bright Stars, and for a moment Omri's heart seemed to leap into his mouth, but then Little Bear actually walked, though slowly and unsteadily, out of the ruined longhouse. "Where you go? Why leave?" he demanded. Patrick stooped and opened his hand so Boone could step out into the seed tray. As far as Omri could judge, the cowboys looked as always, but Little Bear seemed to know at once that something had happened. He even guessed what. "Where horse?" he asked Boone. "Dead," Boone answered shortly. No more was said, but the Indian touched Boone briefly on the shoulder before turning back to Omri. "Now, we put braves in box." But this time it was Patrick who had been doing some thinking. "Just a minute, Little Bear." Little Bear turned to him. "What minute? Do now." "Okay, so say we bring 40 Indians to life. Then what? I mean, what will happen right away? Because you can't go back and start fighting the French right away." "I go back right away. Why no?" "Because you're not well enough? No, Little Bear, you can't be. So we'll have 40 other people on our hands, and we'll have to feed them and look after them until you're ready. That could be days or weeks." "Who week? I strong." "7 days," said Patrick, holding up 7 fingers. "That's a week." Little Bear glowered. "No week, no wait. If stay here and not help tribe, then make new chief." "I'll tell you what," said Patrick. He reached into his pocket. "We'll get Matron back and see what she says." Matron? Yes. Patrick held up the formidable little figure of the nurse in a tall cap. Little Bear made a face. What use white woman with face like old beaver? Well, she saved your life, so you better not be rude. She's like a doctor. Little Bear looked shocked. No woman doctor, he exclaimed. Well, this one is, and she took the medal out of your back last night. If she says you're healed enough to fight, okay, then we'll get started on your army. If not, we'll wait. And he put Matron in the cupboard. When he opened the door, she was standing blinking in the sudden sunlight, and she had a newly starched cap perched on her head. Aha, she said when she saw the boys. I thought as much. The more I thought about it, the more certain I was that you would need me again, and so you know what I did? I popped a few things into my apron pocket just in case. She hitched up her skirt and climbed over the rim of the cupboard. Think ahead, she said. That's my motto. Then she saw Little Bear standing before her with folded arms and uttered a shriek, but it was not of terror. What on earth are you doing out of bed? Are you trying to kill yourself? Not kill self, said Little Bear calmly. Maybe kill you. She bore down on him. Oh, nonsense, my good man. You're delirious, and no wonder. This is absolutely outrageous. 24 hours ago and major surgery, and here you are on your feet instead of flat on your back. I mean on your front. Lie down at once. To the amazement of the boys, and no less perhaps to Little Bear's own surprise, he found himself obeying her commands. Clearly, it never occurred to her that he wouldn't. He lay on a pile of leaves, and she knelt to examine him. And Bright Stars ran to help her. And together they took off the dressings, and Matron peered closely at the wounds and then sat back on her heels. Unbelievable, she said. Fantastic. If I didn't see it, I would never credit it. Beautiful. You know, she went on, and she took out a tiny bottle and some cotton from her capacious pocket. The trouble is we live in an entirely natural and unhealthful life. Eat the wrong foods, don't exercise enough. Look at this man. Just look. Superb specimen. Not an ounce of fat on him. Bright eyes, perfect teeth, skin and hair gleaming with health. Splendid. And if something goes wrong, his magnificent, well-oiled defense system springs into action, and hey presto, he's practically healed. She washed the wounds and then took out a hypodermic needle and squirted it briefly in the sky. Just to be on the safe side, she said, trousers down. And before Little Bear could grasp her intention, she had pulled his buckskins down and plunged the needle into his bottom. He just got a shot. So that shot, which he would have never even heard of when he was around in the 1700s, Matron just gave him right in the rear. Little Bear had borne a lot of pain without a flinch, but this humiliation was too much. He let out a roar as if he'd been gored by a buffalo. What a silly fuss! There, all over, said Matron briskly, withdrawing the needle and rubbing the spot briskly with cotton. Just in case of infection, but really there's little fear of that. He's practically as good as new. What a constitution. Of course, she added modestly, I didn't do a bad job on him. Well, if I do say so myself. Would you think he'd be well enough to do something pretty active? Try stopping him, said Matron. She rose to her feet and dusted the earth off her knees. Personally, if he were on my ward, I'd say bed rest for another day or so, but a body like his knows his own business best. Could he ride, say? That's up to the horse, quipped Matron, laughing rather hoarsely herself. Well, I must be off. Meanwhile, Little Bear, who had scrambled hastily to his feet, now drew his knife and threatened her with it. But Matron, not alarmed at all, wagged her finger at him. Tis, naughty man, that would never do at St. Thomas's. She turned her back on him without a qualm. Baffled, he lowered the knife. Astonished, these primitives, she remarked to Omri. Perfect control over the body and none over the emotions. Back in the cupboard, she offered Omri her hand and then burst out laughing again. Aren't I silly? How could we shake hands? Oh, but do try. I just love to shake hands with a giant, even if it is all a very convincing dream. Omri took her tiny hand between finger and thumb and solemnly shook it. Cheerio, do call me in the future hour of need. We will, said Omri, closing the door. He turned from the cabinet to find Little Bear's eyes fixed on him. Old white she-bear say I good, he said. Now Patrick, Omri, keep word. The boys looked at each other. Right, said Omri, taking a deep breath. Let's get started. Good idea, sending them back to the war?